Hey guys, it's Greg Smith from Westport High School. Today I'm going to show you how to throw and assemble two forms, the stem of a vase and then the top of a cup to create a goblet or a chalice in this case. So I made this one a few years back. Actually used white porcelain clay, which is why the glaze is so vibrant on this. This is a burgundy, I think, or maybe it's chum plum. So what we have is we have several 1-pound balls of clay. I'm going to make the stem piece first, and typically I will use maybe a pound and a pound, or if you want a smaller stem you go maybe with a 1/2 pound and a pound and a half for your cup. Just really depends on what you're trying to do, but for this activity I think I've got about a pound and a pound. So I've got my clay. It's easier to do this off of bats for picking them up. So for my stem, I'm going to start pretty flat because I want to open the base up fairly wide so that it's stable. The base of my stem should match the diameter of the top of my cup as well. So I'll drop the hole all the way to the wheel head or bat, open it up fairly wide. Wider than you think you need it, so that you can always choke it in a little bit. Once you've opened it up, if it's not wide enough, you can't make it any wider, and that's a common mistake most people make, is they throw really nice goblets or chalices, but their stems are too narrow. So at this point we'll slow it down, we'll aim the clay back so it's going to go upwards and inwards. A little bit of water, getting ready to make my first pull. Up and away we go. I'll make another one. Level it off. Another common mistake is most people will make their tops too thin. Since you're going to be joining this together with your cup, you want to have a pretty thick wall to be able to carve into, as well as the bottom of your cup. You want it to be fairly thick, so when you score it you don't carve through it. So after my second pull, I'm going to collar this back together slightly to get it into the form that I'm really looking for. I'm going to close the top a bit more, but at this point it's a good idea to have a sponge on a stick handy, so that you can get on the inside. And I'm basically going to use that as an extension of my hand to compress the outside and the inside walls together to make my last pull. So I'll get it down in there, I'll work this together, and I'll make one more pull. Like so. I'll level off my top. And what I like to do is I like to kind of choke it back in a little bit, which will also make it taller. I also like to leave a little knob in there in the middle section because it looks cool and also gives your knuckles something to grip a hold of so it doesn't slip when you're holding the finished product. Come up again. So from here it's just a matter of getting your form that you want. Collar that in a little bit more, maybe a little bit more there, and that looks pretty good, I think. So also don't like how vertical this is, so I'm going to flatten this angle out a little bit by just putting a little pressure on it. Also take a rib, favorite tool, metal rib, and I'll clean it of course. And I'll start to remove some of the slip because I'm going to be lifting this off by hand. Also, I'm going to flare this out a little bit more up top. I didn't realize the angle was not wide enough. And I'll chuck this in a little bit more here too. That's looking pretty good. Next, I'll take one of these long throwing sticks or wooden ribs, and I'm going to knock off some of this extra clay at the bottom, and then I'll show you a little trick so you have less trimming to do as well. So first I'm going to come in maybe a 1/2 inch, and I'll just go straight down to the wheel head. Flip that around, let it snow plow right off. Very simple. Set that back in. At this point, I'm just going to lightly push down with a little water to flatten this back out, which is going to also create another little angle. And this underneath section will give me a nice spot for my wax line, as long as it's not too sharp. You don't want your edges really, really sharp so they don't chip. So if you like the way that looks, you know, you can do another one here. Maybe another one. Why not? So that's
so funny.
I think gonna work. So it should be fairly dry because I've ribbed it off. At this point, I'll just go ahead and cut this off. I'll take my wire. I will sometimes cut it off when it's still moving, because then I'll know that it's even on the bottom when I cut through. So I'll just slowly work through. We'll stop it. I should be able to pick this up fairly easily. I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to go to my cup, and then I'm going to dry these and put these together. So again, this is about 1 pound. We'll get that going. Centering my left and my right are always working together. I'm coning it up and pushing it back down. Your left and right hand have to work in unison. It's important to brace your arm on your body, your leg, or the splash pan, whatever combination works well for you. Just enough water in your sponge to keep it moistened. Since I'm making a cup, I'm going to start a little taller than the last time. When I drop the hole, I'm going to intentionally leave the base probably about a 1/2 inch thick, maybe a little bit more, so that I can trim it to fit in the diameter of the base. I can trim it to fit, and I can also score it and not have to worry about burning a hole through the inside of my cup. So open it up, slow it down. From here, it's just a matter of whatever cup size you like. Typically for chalices and goblets, for chalices, typical serving of wine might be, I don't know, 8 ounces, 6 ounces. So you want to have some kind of a form that's going to look complementary. I like my tops to have a slightly flared lip, so that gives your lips a place to rest when you're drinking out of it and doesn't dribble down your face. At this point, we'll take the metal rib again with my sponge, and I'll just finalize the shape, and also remove all the slips so that I can lift it off without distorting it. I can also finalize that shape that I'm after. So I think that might kind of work well with the stem. At this point, again, I'm going to knock all this clay off the base. Taking my throwing stick. I'll set this here so this edge is flat, and then I'll put my Kung Fu grip on it and just snowplow that off. So that's the easy way to do that. You could also, give me that calipers. If you really wanted to be precise, which is probably a good idea, you could also take your calipers and adjust it to measure the diameter of the top to see if it matches the base, and it's fairly close. This one's actually a little wider than that, so the balance will be a little bit off. It won't be quite as stable as it should be, but that's another good little tip you could do. So at this point I'll cut this off, and then I'll pause it and dry these and come back and put these back together.
Good job, Sam. You rehydrated? I like it. Thank you.
Alright guys, I'm back. So we've dried the cup, we've dried the stem, and we're getting ready to assemble. But before we do that, you'll notice, if you remember, before I cut it off, I narrowed the base so that I'd have less to trim here. The way that I trim that is not to flip it upside down, because that's just very difficult to do, but to take a fettling knife and I'll set it here like you peel an apple. I'll do it in 2 turns. So what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to remove some of the thickness at the base of the stem. The angle that you hold it at and how you move it through determines how thick it'll be. So that looks kind of okay. It's fairly uniform from here to here. I don't want to make this too thin either. I still want it to have a little bit of weight, and I'll clean this stuff up when I'm all finished. But as long as you get your motion, your movement down, it'll look better and better the more that you do. So at this point, I'm going to just dunk the tip of that in some water to get it wet. I'll flip it back over. I'm going to grab my cup, and the base of this cup again is pretty thick, so I've got a lot of clay there to work with, a little dab of water to create some suction. I'll kind of line that back up. I'll recenter it. That's pretty good right there. I know that I want to kind of get it somewhat narrow so that these two kind of line up, and right now I've got maybe a 1/2 inch to trim off of there. So I'll take a trimming tool. These loop trimming tools are great all-around trimming tools. It's a good idea to lug it down. I'm going to risk it. I'll also keep my hand kind of ready in case it does come free and loose. It's really, really soft. I think it did slide on me. Slid again. I got too much water down here.
Jesus Christ. Why?
So let's do that again. It's anchored down pretty good. Keep sliding on me. So when I finally do get it centered, I apply a little downward pressure. As long as you don't have an excessive amount of water, it should catch. But it's always safest to use lugs to hold it down. So that's going to work pretty good, I think, somewhere in there. I had a lot of clay down here, so I'm going to intentionally leave a little notch. When I join my forms together, I like for them to kind of have a false indicator of where it's joined. I think that'll work. So at this point, I'm looking for a needle tool, a little water around the outside, set a slow speed, and I'll mark it this way, then I'll mark it the other way. A lot of potters will definitely use slip in their seams, which is a good idea. I like to kind of create my own slip when I'm joining it. That way it draws together and bonds well. I'll take the top of this, and first I'm going to line it up, and you'll notice that my stem is somewhat more narrow than the base of my pot. Because it's narrower, I'm not going to score in, I'm going to score out, which will stretch it slightly. go all the way down. A lot of people will also have issues with their forms not staying together. And if you can zoom in on this, you can see that I've really scored it rather deep. Both here and here. And a lot of people will just barely scratch the surface, which is not going to create a strong enough bond. So when you really score them together, you really want them to lock in, which is important. So at this point, I'll line it up, and they're pretty level, and then I'll get it centered, where I think is centered at least. Since it's on the wheel, I'm going to let my wheel do the work for me, and that looks pretty good. At this point, I'll just start working it down a little bit, applying a little bit of pressure, and that's all we need right there. I'll work that seam back together with my fingers supporting it. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to level my top. It's got a little bit of a wonk, which is right there. I think is centered to me. Now you could also do it this way up here. So at this point, I think that's pretty good. I will try to break the seal here. When you flip these two back over, you don't want to be moving it. You want to move it as minimal, as few times as possible. Are you ready here? I'm going to zoom. So I will flip it both together. We'll set it. And we have a rather tall goblet. This is still pretty soft and flimsy, but I want to leave it in the position that it's going to be, and I typically leave them right side up. You could put something on if you want it to be exactly level. You could set a level there, check it, and then you want it to just dry slowly over time. So we started with this, we made one a little bit taller. This obviously shrink down. Got a nice little goblet. Thanks for watching. Anybody got any wine?